Today we have a special treat, and that is that Kesenya and I will be talking to you together. Kesenya, of course, is the leading light of guiding star astrology and a very accomplished astrologer, but also my partner and my wife. Welcome, Kesenya.
Thank you. And it's just such a privilege to be talking about this really exciting topic in preparation for the Egypt trip that we've been planning for some time now.
We have the tremendous opportunity to go to Egypt this November, and you can find the details on the events page of my website at undyingstars.com, or
it's also on my website, which is guidingstarAstrology.com. And and it will take you, the links on my page will take you to the booking pages and the information pages and the itinerary that are hosted by our friend Patricia Awan-Lehman.
Yes, it's called Stars Over Egypt, and of course we'll be talking about the stars on the trip, but we will be seeing the artifacts and experiencing Egypt in person. It's like the preservation of the ancient wisdom. Maybe it's because of the climate, maybe it's because of just the magic of ancient Egypt, but Egypt is a place where the ancient wisdom has been encoded in the rocks and in the monuments and in the artwork.
And the energy of the entire country, really.
And so I'm so excited to have this opportunity, but because of the special access that Patricia is able to get, we have to reserve we will have special access to the pyramids, special access to the Sphinx, special access to sites that are maybe less well known to the general public, but we have to book those soon. So it's almost July now, and basically we have to reserve these places or postpone the trip. So we need those expressions of interest. If you want to go, the way to express your interest is through Patricia's website, her sign up for Stars Over Egypt, which you can get to my events.
Like we said, through our events pages on both our websites.
And we need to get enough expressions of interest to have this event. So in order to just let everybody know one more time, and also to dive into why Egypt is so special, we're going to talk a little bit today.
You're going to love this topic. Like, there's some really unique insights that David has gained, and I'm going to share astrologically as well about those insights and how they are impacting our lives today. It's going to knock your socks off. So stick around for the rest of this video, and do express your interest in coming if you would like to join us in Egypt in November.
For Stars Over Egypt. So let me just launch right in to what I want to talk about. But the theme that I'm trying to set by saying this, ancient Egypt is the oldest civilization that we know of, quote, know of. It's the oldest according to the conventional timeline. You could talk about ancient Sumer, who had the first texts. It's about the same time period, but most conventional archaeologists will argue for Egypt being the oldest. I don't really, get into who's the oldest, because I believe they all show clear signs of being connected to something far more ancient. So ancient Egypt, ancient Sumer and Mesopotamia, ancient India, ancient China. These are very ancient civilizations. We could argue, well, maybe China is older than Egypt, maybe India, maybe the Maya or the predecessor cultures to the Maya. The Maya are very ancient in the Americas, and the Olmecs before the Maya, there were other civilizations that are predecessor cultures, very ancient. But what my work has shown through the myths and the analysis of ancient myth and ancient artwork is that they are all inheritors of a worldwide system that is even more ancient than they are. And this myth evidence stands alongside the physical evidence, the archaeological evidence, the evidence in these monuments. We have clear similarities between the stonework in Egypt and some of the stonework in the Americas, the polygonal cyclopean blocks with nubs sticking out. There are other researchers who have gone into this in great detail. The physical evidence is overwhelming. The mythological evidence is overwhelming. And it's also found in artwork, which is what we'll talk about and what we'll see when we go to Egypt. We'll see the physical evidence of a culture that is extremely ancient, basically the oldest one acknowledged, or among the oldest acknowledged by the conventional timeline. And yet I argue, and other researchers argue, that they have clear signs of inheriting something from a culture or cultures or civilizations far more ancient. So let's get into that and talk about that. So what I'm going to do is we'll dive into some slides examining some artwork. So let's go all the way back to the first dynasty of Egypt. And I've made a whole video about this Narmer Palette. It's called the Narmer Palette because it inscribes the name of King Narmer, who in some of the king lists, particularly the king list from the time of King Den, one of his very close successors, King Den, lists Narmer as the first king of the first dynasty. So we're looking at a piece of artwork, a tablet. It's inscribed with art on both sides, called the Narmer Palette. It's dated to around 3200 BCE, or BC, 5,200 years ago. And it's the first king of the first dynasty. And I've made a whole video explaining that this tablet exhibits artwork that is using conventions that are found around the world that are based on the stars. It is celestial metaphor being depicted beyond any doubt. And so that whole video you can take a look at. I basically explain that if this is the first known tablet from the first king of the first dynasty of ancient Egypt, before that we do not have written records. So before this is prehistoric Egypt. It's before history. Doesn't mean that people weren't doing interesting things, but conventional archaeology and conventional timeline does not acknowledge that there could have been an advanced civilization preceding this from which the Egyptians in the first dynasty, the dynastic Egyptians, got these conventions. And yet, these conventions show up in Maya artwork, and I've shown that. These conventions show up in artwork from ancient India, and I've shown that. But I could go around the world. I could show it in ancient Japan. I could show it in artwork around the world. And so if this just, quote, pops up on the first tablet of the first king of the first dynasty of dynastic Egypt, how did it pop up in all those other places unless it came from something earlier? At least that, to me, is the strongest possibility. There are other possibilities we could entertain, but most likely, and this fits in with the arguments of other researchers, there is evidence around the world for advanced civilizations before dynastic Egypt, but they are basically unknown to conventional history.
Well, if we could get permission to excavate all of Göbekli Tepe, we might actually find the evidence that we're looking for, but that's a whole other topic for another video.
No, but it's important because for a long time, people said, well, where's the evidence of...
It's right there. They're just not letting us explore it.
But Göbekli Tepe wasn't really excavated until the late 90s, and then all of a sudden, wait a minute, here we have a site showing extreme specialization, like making those kinds of stones in that massive size and in that massive number. It's an enormous site. Takes basically more than just villagers.
Absolutely.
And more than just subsistence or hunter-gatherers. And yet it was buried, deliberately buried apparently, and you can date the matter that's burying it to 10,000 500 years ago, at least. So anyway, let's...
Just proving that there were ancient civilizations before Egypt doing incredible things. So,
and yet the conventional history still tries to say, well, Göbekli Tepe, it must have been some kind of, the hunter-gatherers every now and then, they would take a vacation from hunting and gathering and make these enormous... No, it is... That is a really important site to bring up. So thank you for putting that in, because that is irrefutable evidence for something inexplicable within the conventional paradigm. The conventional paradigm is simply so flawed that it requires
a lot of faith to believe in it.
It needs to be thrown out and replaced by something else. So anyway, Narmer Palette, based on the stars, and I want to show, so when I put that up, that video, some people said, well, the conventional archaeologists don't argue that Egypt just popped out of nowhere. Quit saying popped out of nowhere. Okay, maybe popped out of nowhere is a bit of a, exaggeration for effect. But what I mean is, it didn't come, conventional archaeology does not acknowledge the possibility of an advanced ancient civilization, and yet Egypt and other artwork and monuments around the world show evidence of that, and the myths and the star myth system being in place in all these cultures in their most ancient texts. The most ancient Sumerian Gilgamesh, or they called him Bilgamesh, texts are using this system. The descent of Inanna or Inanna in ancient Sumer uses this system. Those are their most ancient texts. The ancient Vedas, the ancient pyramid texts of Egypt are using and describing characters that I have shown to be based on the stars, and their artwork around the world based on the stars using the same system, including the Maya. So how did that happen if it didn't come from a predecessor culture? So when I say popped out of nowhere, what I mean is the conventional argument is, well, there was prehistory before this, but it was really fairly, it was not advanced. They were
primitive,
not
hunter-gatherer kind of lifestyles.
Certainly not spreading a single system around the globe. You cannot say so. I'm going to show a quotation here from a conventional Egyptologist, and this is a conventional Egyptologist who obviously loves Egypt. This Egyptologist has spent his whole life studying and researching Egypt and teaching about it, but this is exhibiting this conventional mindset that I'm talking about. So when I say popped out of nowhere, basically the conventional argument says it was nowhere before ancient Egypt. There was no advanced civilization. Let's take a look at the Sphinx and the pyramids of Giza. This is the middle pyramid, or the second pyramid, the pyramid of Khafra, or as he's also called in the Greek version of his name, Khephren, and in front of it is the Sphinx. And the conventional argument is that the Sphinx was built by Khafra, this pyramid was built by Khafra, and that was around 2500 BC, or BCE if you prefer, and there's just no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. But as most watchers of this channel know, Professor Robert Schoch and the late, great John Anthony West, in the early 90s, traveled to Egypt to investigate the weathering on the Sphinx, that it has clear signs of heavy water erosion.
And not just the Sphinx, as you can see in this photo, the surrounding rocks that encase the
That's
Sphinx
right, the Sphinx enclosure.
Highly eroded through some sort of water.
The Sphinx enclosure. And I've had the wonderful opportunity to meet Professor Robert Schoch and the late John Anthony West in conferences, and spend quality time around, like one-on-one time around the dinner table after dinner, just talking. And so this theory, John Anthony West saw a line from an earlier archaeologist named Schwaller de Lubitsch. Schwaller de Lubitsch says, well, the erosion on the Sphinx is clearly water, and he just drops that nugget and moves on. And John Anthony West saw that line from Schwaller de Lubitsch and said, wait a minute, if the Sphinx is clearly eroded by water, that is a very big deal, because dynastic Egypt, it was dry, it was arid lands at that time. They got their water from the Nile flooding. It was a wonderful way to do agriculture, because the Nile flooded on a very set rhythm, but they did not get rainfall. So if the Sphinx is eroded by rainfall, that is a big deal. But John Anthony West said, I need an actual geologist. And he had friends who he asked in academia, and Professor Robert Schoch, a geologist, said, yeah, I'll go investigate it with you. And so Robert Schoch and John Anthony West went to the Sphinx, and Robert Schoch said, it is clearly water erosion. There's water erosion and there's wind erosion. There's both here, but there's clearly a lot of water erosion, and that indicates that the Sphinx may have been built long before Egypt's climate became what it is today, and what it was during dynastic Egypt. So that you'll see this referred to in this quotation from a conventional archaeologist. So all these quotes now are from a conventional archaeologist, and he says, now the Sphinx was constructed, these are direct quotes, exact quotes. Now the Sphinx was constructed about 4,500 years ago, because it's Khephren who built it. We're virtually sure. This is a conventional Egyptologist speaking. I'll just put that at the bottom. Everything above this is from a conventional archaeologist, Egyptologist. But a couple of geologists have suggested, when they looked at the rock, that it looks like water erosion on the Sphinx. He's talking about when John Anthony West and Robert Schoch started putting this out, it rocked Egyptology, and conventional Egyptologists universally rejected it and attacked them, and were extremely aggressive and insulting and condescending towards this theory. But a couple of geologists have suggested, when they looked at the rock, that it looks like water erosion on the Sphinx. Now, if it's water erosion, there wasn't water there in 2500 BC. It's probably, they say, rain. That Egypt was much more moist at this point. In other words, it was in a rainier time when the Sphinx was built. And they pushed the date of the pyramid. I think he means the Sphinx, but since he believes that the Sphinx and the pyramid are made by the same time, which I think he's probably right. No, they could be. The pyramids could be much earlier. Anyway, doesn't matter. I think he meant the Sphinx, but they pushed the date of the pyramid back to 10,000 BC. I think he means they pushed the date of the Sphinx. It doesn't matter. We don't need to argue about it. Yeah, if there was an advanced civilization at 10,000 BC, that blows up the conventional argument. Whether they did more than the Sphinx, the Valley Temple, the Osirion, some of these temples have enormous blocks. They're very different than, and we'll see those when we go to Egypt. But anyway, what he's saying is, based on the erosion, they pushed the date of the construction of some of these monuments, including the Sphinx, back to 10,000 BC. They're wrong. That's the exact next words out of his mouth. These are all direct quotes. Let me just say it. They're wrong. Again, this is conventional Egyptologist speaking, not me, not Kesenya. We're not to be confused.
My question is, if they're wrong, why are they wrong?
Why are they wrong? Here comes the argument. Almost all Egyptologists agree. All right, so argument number one, counter-argument number one, almost all Egyptologists agree. The Sphinx was carved during the reign of Khephren. Okay, well, I guess if all Egyptologists agree, then that erosion can't be there. It just can't be there. I mean, he's not addressing the erosion at all here. No, but he does say, now one of the reasons we're quite sure they're wrong, so he's given us, first of all, the weight of authority says they're wrong. But let me give you a reason. One of the reasons we're quite sure they're wrong is that there was no significant Egyptian civilization in 10,000 BC that could have carved the Sphinx. All right, so
that doesn't explain the water erosion.
We're not even going to talk about the water erosion. It cannot be 10,000 BC. Why not? Because there was no significant. So, in other words, when I say the Narmer Palette popped out of nowhere, according to the conventional argument? This is what I mean. They are saying there was no significant Egyptian civilization that could have been doing things like participating in a worldwide pattern of celestial metaphor or building massive monuments. It was just prehistoric villages. If we know that, then the Sphinx couldn't have been built by them.
And yet just up the road's Göbekli Tepe, 10,000 years old. So anyhow.
But the point is, they're using their model to say, because we've decided there was nothing before Egypt, therefore the Sphinx cannot be before dynastic Egypt. Therefore the Sphinx cannot be from before dynastic Egypt. What's the proof? The proof is our
word.
Our paradigm, our model. Our model says there was no significant Egyptian civilization in 10,000 BC, so therefore it couldn't have been carved in 10,000 BC. Don't bother me with evidence. Don't bother me with water erosion, because that's it. Remember, from our prehistoric lecture, they were just beginning to learn about farming even. So there's no doubt about it. The Sphinx is not from 10,000 BC. End of argument.
There's our evidence.
Okay, so
evidence.
So look, it doesn't even address the physical evidence. It doesn't address the fact that a trained geologist, a tenured professor in geology, went over to the Sphinx and said, yes, this is clearly water erosion. The speaker here is not, by his own admission, a geologist. He's an Egyptologist. He's an expert in certain aspects of history and Egyptology. He's not a geologist. He's not addressing the geological evidence. He's just saying, well, look, my paradigm is set, and so the geology evidence has to take a back seat to what I say. There was no significant civilization pre-dynastic. Okay, now, this presentation is not going to argue about the weathering on the Sphinx. That's been presented. That's been now argued over for 30 years. What I'm going to say is we don't have to just use the Sphinx. There are tons of other physical objects in Egypt, some of which we'll see on this trip in November. There are cuts and scoops that researchers such as Christopher Dunn and Ben from Uncharted X and Russ and Kyle from the Brothers of the Serpent have documented, made extensive videos about. There are vases that are incredibly precise that have been documented, and we will see some of this amazing artwork. There are even cuts in the stone where the cut was obviously a mistake and it went off in the wrong direction, but it went so far that the question is, what were they using that cut so fast that by the time they realized that they were on the wrong direction, they had to stop, but they'd already cut in a couple of feet into solid stone. That wasn't just chisels, and for 2 months they were going in the wrong direction before they figured it out. It was, oh, whoops, it went a little too far. And you can see those in museums and on blocks just sitting around in Egypt that other researchers have talked about, and we'll see some of that. But we can also look at the star myth evidence. So let me just quickly show one piece of evidence that I've never talked about. But I'm going to go right back to this Narmer Palette and focus on the crowns. So King Narmer is supposedly the first king to unify Upper and Lower Egypt. Upper Egypt is actually southern Egypt. It means up the Nile, and since the Nile runs south to north, upper, the higher ground, is actually in the south. And Lower Egypt, where it runs out into the Mediterranean, is in the north. So just keep that in mind, lower and upper. But Narmer, in this scene on the left side of your screen, that is clearly a celestial pattern that I've talked about, and there's a whole video about that, and it matches up with celestial patterns around the world. I've talked extensively about that, but he's wearing what is known as the white crown. And so the white crown was the crown of Upper Egypt, meaning the south, the higher ground where the Nile is coming from before it gets down to the delta. The Upper Egypt white crown was called the Hedjet crown. It means the white one. He's wearing the white one, and that's this tall, kind of conical, smooth-shaped crown. Now let me just say, and you can just find this on Wikipedia if you look up two crowns of Egypt, or white crown, red crown. Wikipedia will tell you not one of these crowns of ancient Egypt that are depicted have ever been found. Not one. And they speculate, and it says this on Wikipedia, and I've heard professors say this, well, maybe there was only one, and they passed it down from, so it was never buried with any of the kings, even though they're depicted wearing it. Well, it was never buried because it was given to their successor and then eventually lost. And so we don't have a single one. Well, what I'm going to show you is it is celestial. Whether or not they ever made a single one, I don't know. They made them in artwork. They even made them in three-dimensional statues, but we don't have any of either the white crown or the other one that's on the other side of the Narmer Palette is the red crown. So I'm going to circle that. So on the reverse side, there's also carving. The same name of the king, Narmer, is on both sides. And on one side, he's wearing the white crown. On the other side, presumably this is Narmer again because his hieroglyph is right next to this individual and the face looks kind of the same. It might have been two different artists, as I've heard some Egyptologists explain, doing one side then the other. But Narmer is wearing a white crown. Narmer is wearing a red crown. That's the red crown on the other side. It looks very different. Sometimes it's called a kind of a basket shape. That's the red crown, and it was called the deshret. It's the lower Egypt, or the Delta area crown, the deshret, the red one. So the uniting of Upper and Lower Egypt is thought to be depicted on this palette. Aha, look, we have a king wearing both the red crown and the white crown, smiting his enemies. He's the first king of dynastic Egypt. He unites Upper and Lower Egypt. Well, those are celestial crowns. I've never explained this before. I've never even published this before, so putting it out in a video is not always my favorite way to do it. I like to write it in a book, but I don't care who knows it. This is using celestial system. If that celestial system is already so advanced by the time of Narmer, they're already using the stars to come up with their headgear. And I've pointed that out in other figures around the world, such as the Phrygian cap of the Greeks, the Phrygian cap that's associated with King Midas, king of Phrygia, or with Phrygian archers. You can see it on statues. I've shown that Midas is connected to a constellation called Perseus. Perseus also wears the Phrygian cap. Perseus looks like he's wearing a Phrygian cap. So I've argued that cap comes from Perseus, not the other way around. And the constellation gave them the headgear, gave them the myth, gave them the headgear. Well, we see it in the very first tablet of the first king of Egypt. And let me just show you, this is the Palermo stone. It's from about 1,000 years, 900 years later. But it shows, some of these early king lists show these two crowns. In this top register, the Palermo stone, it's a king list. The oldest kings are just wearing the red crown, Lower Egypt. I blew it up there. So you can see there's the red crown. But later on, we get a king who's wearing both crowns. I don't know if you can see it very well. It took me a while scanning through the Palermo stone. I was getting frustrated. I know there's a double crown in here somewhere. There's one. I've circled this king sitting on his throne, holding a flail, and wearing both the white crown and the red crown. And when they're combined together, it was called the skent by the Greeks, the skent. It's a Greek version of an Egyptian word that the Egyptian word was skemti, and it means the two powerful ones. So the white crown in Egyptian was called the white one, the red crown was called the red one. When they put them together, it's the two powerful ones, the skent. You can just call it the skent crown or the double crown. But there it is. And down here, we also have a pair of cartouches, which is where the pharaoh's name or the king's name, you can see it's the same name in both, but on one, above one, there is a red crown, and above the other, there is a white crown with the same name. So they're saying, now we have kings who have both, united Upper and Lower Egypt. So now let me just argue briefly, and then we'll get into some of the implications of it and what your thoughts on it are, Kesenya. Let me lay out the evidence. I argue that this is celestial. And what really made me think of it was after the first intermediate period, the 11th and 12th dynasties, there's a 12th dynasty king named Amenemhat. Amenemhat 1. And in some of the texts that are attributed to the time of Amenemhat 1, and they're thought to be talking about Amenemhat 1, it sounds to me very familiar. Let me show you. Amenemhat 1, there's two texts that I'm going to look at briefly from Amenemhat. One is called the Prophecy of Neferti. Neferti was a figure in the 4th dynasty. So it's like set back in the 4th dynasty. This is a 12th dynasty king, back in the time of the Old Kingdom. And this papyrus, it's called the Papyrus Hermitage. It's actually in St. Petersburg, or Leningrad today. It's sometimes called the Papyrus Petersburg. 1116b is the number of this that has been given, the accession number, or the museum number. So if you want to go look it up and you can read it, it's a prophecy saying, oh, someday someone will come. And so we think it was written in the time of Amenemhat 1 because it's saying there's a king who will come from the south, Ameni, true of voice. So Ameni, true of voice, is this king that will come from the south. This papyrus is pretending to be from a couple thousand years earlier. Amenemhat ruled around 1991 BC, 1991. That's the year I graduated from West Point, so it's easy for me to remember. I graduated from West Point in 1991 AD, or CE if you prefer. So Amenemhat took the throne in 1991 BC, and so unless this actually came from thousands of years earlier and predicted him, it was probably written during his reign and said, oh, this king, he was having trouble sleeping, and he called in his priest, and he said, priest, read me something. And the priest said, all right, what do you want? A tale of the past or a tale of the future? And the king says, the past I already know about. It's been written down. It's been done. It's over. Tell me about the future. And so Neferti, the priest, says, okay, let me tell you about the future. There's going to be a big disaster and then a time of chaos, but then there will come a king from the south, Ameni, true of voice, and Ameni is his name. He will take up the white crown. He will take up the red crown. He'll bring things back together again. And it says in this text, the Son of Man, or you could translate it the son of a man. In other words, the son of a commoner is how it's usually, the Egyptologists say, oh, well, what we're emphasizing here is that Ameni, usually we call the pharaoh the son of Ra. In this text, it calls him the son of man. So that's emphasizing that he's not from the blood of the pharaohs, but he's going to reunite Egypt and bring it back to glory. But he's called the Son of Man. Now, where have you heard someone calling himself the Son of Man before?
Mm-hmm. Those who've grown up in Christian religious circles know exactly where you've heard that.
It's very common in the Bible for Jesus to be referred to as the Son of Man, or in the text to refer to himself as the Son of Man. This is very intriguing. It says, the Son of Man will make his name for eternity and everlasting. So this king, true of voice, calling himself the Son of Man, will make his name for eternity and everlasting. So now let's go to another text. For eternity and everlasting time. Let's go to another text, also from the time of Amenemhat, which is called Amenemhat's instructions to his son. So it may have been written in the time of his son, because there's speculation, and you can read about this on Wikipedia or in scholarly articles, that Amenemhat might have been murdered, and so maybe his son wrote this afterwards. But Amenemhat in this text is talking presumably to his son, and he says, watch out, son, be careful. The very eater of my bread is the one who raised his hand against me. The very people of my household, the ones who were supposed to be my bodyguards, they're the ones who turned against me. The very eater of my bread. I gave him bread from my table. He raised his hand against me. Again, if you are familiar with the Bible, these are passages that have reflections and echoes in the New Testament for sure. Matthew 10:36, go look it up. The reason I'm really familiar with that is at West Point we had to watch Breaker Morant over and over. Breaker Morant is about some Australians. We had to watch it over and over. We were shown it because they were teaching us lessons from Breaker Morant. And when Breaker Morant he's being led to execution, the priest behind him says, well, do you want any texts for your for your
Final
epitaph?
words, yeah.
And he says, yeah, Matthew 10:36. And everyone goes through the Bible to see, what does it say? A man's enemies will be they of his own household. They of his own household. This is like the prophecy of Amenemhat is using language that is used again in the text of the Bible, because they're all from a common source. These are the ancient scriptures of the world, are all based on the stars, and they're based on this ancient worldwide system. They're all an inherited system, probably from a civilization way more ancient than any that we know of, Egypt, India. So Matthew 10:36 says, they of his own household. Okay, so let me move along. He also says in the same text, the one anointed with myrrh. Does that sound familiar? The one anointed with myrrh. Obviously, if you grow up in a Christian church, you learn about the three kings who bring their gifts, which are
gold, frankincense, and myrrh.
Myrrh. That's the only place you ever really hear of myrrh. But anyway, myrrh, an anointing, and they explain in Sunday school what gold, frankincense, and myrrh all represent. This anointing, this one anointed with myrrh, was the one who poured lowly water. This is really interesting. Like Jesus does this foot washing. He pours lowly water, but he's also the one anointed with myrrh. So this is from a king who took the throne in 1991, or from his son, is talking...
BCE.
Yeah, BC, or BCE. The one appointed with myrrh. And he even says in the same text, I was like a snake in the desert, which if you know in the Bible, there's a verse from Psalm 22:6, I am a worm and no man, is also thought or taught to be, oh, this is talking about Jesus and his, he was betrayed and then he's crucified and he's like a worm. And that's celestial, basically. I was like a snake in the desert. This is all celestial metaphor. But now let me talk about, when I heard that Amenemhat used phrases like the Son of Man, I said, wait a minute. I took up the white crown, I took up the red crown. Those are celestial. And the Son of Man, Jesus in the Bible, I'm just tracing out my thought process. Jesus is associated, I've shown, with the constellations Ophiuchus and Aquarius. Most associated with Ophiuchus and Aquarius. We could argue about why both, but there's many figures who have different stories that sometimes they're with one constellation, sometimes with another. I've also found, like Dionysus has the same with Aquarius, sometimes with Ophiuchus sometimes. So there's like a connection between Aquarius and Ophiuchus. But why Aquarius? Why is that important? Well, because Aquarius wears interesting headgear, as I'm going to show you. So let's find Aquarius on this on this star map that I'm showing. This is the outlines of the constellations of H.A. Ray. I've talked about why those are so important. These are the zodiac constellations. I'm drawing in the path of the ecliptic, where the sun, moon, and planets travel as they go from east to west. They go through these different constellations, the background stars of the sun. And if we look along the zodiac, we're going to find the constellations that I believe give us the white crown and the red crown. And that's significant because it's like this system is already developed by the time the Narmer Palette comes out. And it's a worldwide system. Libra, I'm just going to show some zodiac constellations for those familiar, as I'm just going from right to left on your screen. Libra, there's Scorpio, there's Ophiuchus, so you can see that the ecliptic, it goes right through the foot. The foot of Ophiuchus does cross the ecliptic, or the ecliptic does cross through the stars of Ophiuchus, but Ophiuchus is typically left out. He or she is the hidden sign. Okay, Sagittarius, then comes, of course, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, and Aries. So why do I say that Jesus is sometimes associated with Aquarius? Well, let me move the ecliptic out of the way. First of all, you can see Aquarius looks like he's running forward, holding a big water vessel, pouring out water, and Jesus pours out water that turns to wine and does this foot washing scene, pouring lowly water. I've argued and I've shown depictions of Jesus doing the foot washing scene look like they're in the posture of Aquarius very often. But also, Aquarius is in between the constellations, the zodiac constellations of Pisces and Capricorn. So, as you know, Jesus always says, I separate the Pisces from the Capricorn. No, he doesn't really say that. He says, I separate the fish from the goats. No, he doesn't say that. He says, I separate the sheep from the goats. So he goes one constellation over to Aries. Aries is the ram or the lamb. He separates the sheep, Aries, from the goats, Capricorn. So Jesus is either associated with Aquarius or Pisces. And of course, he does have some Pisces. He does have some Pisces associations as well.
Age
the fish.
of Pisces.
Yeah, age of Pisces and the sacrificial nature of Pisces. And so
also age of Aquarius, which we're moving into.
We're moving into the age of Aquarius. So Jesus can be shown to be associated with Aquarius in some cases. And that's why when Amenemhet says, the Son of Man, and he took up the white crown and the red crown, let's look at the zodiac constellations that I've labeled here. Do any of them look like they might be wearing a white crown or a red crown? Like if we had to pick zodiac constellations to be wearing a white crown or a red crown, I've just zoomed in a little bit. Let me show you what I think they would be. I've just circled the constellations of Aquarius, and in that same circle, Capricorn and the southern fish, with Fomalhaut, the important royal star Fomalhaut, in the mouth of the fish. So
not the fish of Pisces for anyone who's into astrology.
Right.
It's
This is a constellation called
the southern fish.
Piscis austrinus, or the southern fish, with Fomalhaut. And Pisces is just to the left. You can see one of the fishes of Pisces outside the circle just to the left. But there's Aquarius. Look at Aquarius and think about which crown you would guess that, if you had to say he's wearing one of the two crowns, which one would it be? And now let's look at Sagittarius. I'll circle in red. Sagittarius right next to Aquarius. Could we argue that the two crowns of Egypt come from this region of the sky? I think we could make that argument. Here's from the Narmer Palette. There's your white crown of Upper Egypt, the white one. And there from the Narmer Palette on the other side is the red crown of Lower Egypt, the red one. I mean, look at them. Mm-hmm. I think we could make the argument that, Egyptologists don't even know exactly what that curly Q thing is on the red crown or why it is in that shape. They say, well, it might have been a basket, but we've never found one. So we don't know because they're celestial. That's what I would argue. This is indication of a sophisticated, well-developed celestial system in operation already before the Narmer Palette. And it's already in operation before the first texts of ancient Mesopotamia, the Gilgamesh epic. It's already in operation before ancient India. And now let's look over at the white crown. Aquarius, with that kind of diamond-shaped head, I've spoken before about the bishop's mitre. And the word mitre, by the way, comes from Mithras. Mithras really wears a Phrygian cap and I think is associated with a different constellation. So I think the mitre comes from Aquarius. And if you look at the mitre, this is a picture of an actual mitre from the literalist Christian hierarchical orthodoxy wears, bishops get to wear this particular hat that I've argued comes from Aquarius. And it's actually like a fish kind of shaped hat. It has a slit in it, and Aquarius is associated with Oannes and Noah. Oannes, this fish-headed god. There's a bishop in chess. You can see the shape. Now look at the shape of the bishop in chess, or the bishop's hat, the mitre, and look at the white crown. It is a pretty strong argument, I believe. And I also found one picture of a group of bishops. I think they're from the Armenian Orthodox Church, actually. And look at the bishops. The hat, the crown is really reminiscent of the white crown. The white crown. It's the white bishop's hat, and I would argue, I've already argued that the bishop's hat comes from Aquarius. I think that's pretty easy to establish. Mm-hmm. And so it's a very short stretch to say that the white crown of Upper Egypt is also from Aquarius. And so if that's the case, then where's the red crown? Well, you don't have to look very far. It's right there on Sagittarius. The curly Q thing is because Sagittarius has this line of stars that makes a plume. I would argue that's why some cultures have a feather, like they wear a feather. The Native Americans of North America have a feather, and there are side locks. You know, the Egyptians, if you watch the Ten Commandments, you'll see Yul Brynner with a side lock, and
Charlton Heston.
Charlton Heston with a side lock at some point in the movie. But different headgear and fashions and hairstyles come from the stars if they're ancient and traditional. And I would argue this system is already in place. Anyway, that is my presentation.
Well, it's fascinating to me, David. Your work is incredible, seriously incredible, and you know I'm very privileged to be here on your channel. But can I just say to whoever is watching this, if you haven't bought David's books or done any of his courses, get on it, because his system of celestial language is just amazing, and he's certainly the first one to put that all together. So please check out his work and find out more, because it's mind-boggling. It's absolutely mind-boggling. To my mind,
Thank you for that.
Those who don't know me, I'm an astrologer, so I'm just going to share some thoughts that this brings to my mind from an astrological perspective about the age that we're currently in and all the things that we're experiencing at the moment. And what's really jumped out to me is that Capricorn sits between Aquarius and Sagittarius. It's the sign in the middle of the screen, as we've just seen. And so to my mind, there's something important about Capricorn to pay attention to. It is like Jesus came to separate the sheep and the goats, as we talked about. Capricorn is separating the white crown of Egypt here and the red crown of Egypt. So what's going on? Well, I'll point out, for those who aren't aware, that current world leadership is very Capricornian based. It's very hierarchical. It's about Capricorn in astrology is about levels and hierarchies that go up like a pyramid, interestingly enough, to the top. The royal family of England have massive Capricorn energy in all their charts. I'm pretty sure they choose and pick their charts of when they're born, you know, whether that's by cesarean or timing wise or whatever, to make sure certain planets fall in Capricorn. They have a lot of Capricorn energy running traditionally through all their astrology charts. And we all know that the British royal family, in fact, most countries, most elite, let's call them, families, use astrology very heavily. In fact, the Vatican has more astrologers employed working for it than any other place in the world. So go figure. Seeing as they discourage the common man from using astrology. But so Capricorn is this predominant energy in hierarchy and leadership. Let me just say right from the get-go here, Capricorn is not an evil sign. I'm not saying that that Capricorn is bad. No sign is bad. No sign is bad. But they tend to use the symbology of the Capricorn sign, and it's now the symbology of Capricorn is now considered evil. If you think about the painting that has recently been released, the red painting, which clearly, when it's mirrored, has Baphomet, the goat, imagery on it. This is Capricornian imagery, like Baphomet, the goat.
Baphomet.
Thank you.
Sorry.
He's the detail person. I'm the big picture.
But would you say that, and I don't want to steal your thunder if you're about to get to this point, but Capricorn being in between the two crowns might be seen as uniting those two crowns? Or, why would
Maybe.
the different families of Europe, or, in England in particular, if they're tracing their lineage back to Egypt for some reason,
they do.
Then, and I'm not the first to argue that kind of the different processions along the Thames River have echoes back to ancient Egypt along the Nile River, and the swans and the different imagery that they use. So is it possible that if they know that the white crown and the red crown and the uniting of those two are celestial, and it's pretty obvious when you look at it. If you say, where are the white crown and where are the red crown, it's pretty obvious. Then you might say, well, Capricorn could be seen as uniting them both, or reaching out to both. I don't know if you were going towards that.
I wasn't heading that way, but okay. I think that's a really fascinating point to make, and perfectly legitimate point. I know in your book, The Undying Stars, you mention about a certain group of Egyptians, and I won't go into it. I'll encourage everyone to buy The Undying Stars and read it for yourself. But there's a certain group of Egyptians who established their own community, their own collective with certain beliefs.
Yeah, the whole trace of basically the elites goes back to, this system was the ancient system, and then something happened.
Yeah.
And so, and when that something happened, the ancient world was basically destroyed, and we got the Dark Ages. When the Roman Empire, it didn't fall, it was dismantled deliberately, and then these elite families took over, and I go into that quite extensively in The Undying Stars, building on the research of others, and then I pick up that thread again in Myth and Trauma. So, anyway, yeah, that's
that's a good point. So yes, these current world leaders who've put themselves at the peak of the pyramid, of the hierarchy,
or who are descended from those families that did that,
descended from these Egyptian lineages. Now, getting to the astrological point of view, in astrology, we've only known about the planet Pluto since the 1930s. And prior to that, Pluto was not a recognized energy in astrology. We didn't know of his existence. But when he was discovered, he was given the name of this very ancient god of the underworld. And for those who aren't familiar with astrology and the symbology of Pluto as the god of the underworld, he is the god of exposing corruption, and he's a truth-telling god, but he does it through quite heavy, difficult, traumatic means.
He's the god of the underworld, so I guess he brings up things from the depths. All the gold and all the oil and all the riches under this earth belong to his name. Pluto, actually, I don't know if you're about to get to it. The Greeks called him Hades, and the world of the underworld was Hades, but they didn't always like to say that name. So they would refer to him as the wealthy, or as the wealthy one, which in ancient Greek was Pluton. So the Greeks also did call him Hades, but they also called him Pluton, and the Romans call him Pluto, the wealthy one. But he's wealthy because all the riches of the earth, the diamonds and jewels and emeralds, come from under the earth. So he has all those things, those hidden things. And so bringing up those hidden things are part of his energy.
Yes, that's right. So he is, as Dave has just mentioned, the god of great wealth in ancient times. And often when we go through our dark nights of the soul, when we go through the deep, dark underworld, the depths of life experience that are difficult, that's when we find our inner strength. And that is a metaphoric gold, our inner power is like the gold as well. So there's a lot of symbology with Pluto for power, for exposure, for dredging things up. The darkness comes to light. And that's actually spoken of quite extensively in biblical scriptures as well. Where there is light, there can be no darkness. Once things are exposed and revealed, darkness runs and hides. It cannot exist.
Everything that's done in the darkness will be shouted from the rooftops, as mentioned as well.
So, to my mind, we're living in an exciting age since the discovery of Pluto, where these energies that Pluto represents have been given over to the planet Pluto. And in astrological theory, the idea is that when our consciousness is ready, these planets, these astral bodies are discovered, and they carry the energy that of the time and of the gods that they're given name of. So Pluto, we've been in these Plutonian times ever since the 1930s, where a lot of truth is being revealed, a lot of trauma is coming to light. Pluto rules conspiracies as well, and we've never been in a time more subject to these things that are happening. So Pluto and Uranus both are planets that rule awakening in astrology too. So my point being that all this Pluto energy has now just recently transited in tropical astrology through the sign of Capricorn. And so what have we seen? We've had a mass awakening since 2008 when Pluto moved into Capricorn, and Pluto's just now, as we're recording this video, about to move into the sign of Aquarius and leave this middle ground of Capricorn between the red crown and the white crown behind. He's moving there, and we've had an exposure of the power structures of the world being not quite what we thought they were. We've had so much revealed about the nature of authority and governance, the nature of the hierarchies. A lot of this has been exposed, and a lot of, Dave, you'll be familiar with this, the hidden agendas and the behavior of financial organizations and structures like Wall Street and so forth as well have come undone and come unraveled during Pluto's transit since 2008.
You know, it's so interesting, 2008, because I really got started on the direction that I've been going for the last 15 years in 2009. So that's when I really started to explore.
A lot of people woke up. A lot of people woke up around that time, myself included. You have that story. Many of my clients also share awakening stories from that period too. So no coincidences about this. Now I'm talking tropical astrology. So it's 23 degrees ahead of what we see actually in the sky.
And that's because of precession, actually. We won't get into tropical sidereal, but it has to do with precession. So,
and it has it would take a whole video to explain the difference between tropical and visible sidereal astrology, but they're both important. They both have a role to play, and we live on an earth governed by seasons, and therefore tropical astrology does work. Anyhow, so Capricorn has been transited by Pluto for 14 years. It's interesting to me, though, and you mentioned the Sphinx, Dave, it's so interesting to me that Capricorn is hierarchical governance and leadership, which is what we have been experiencing potentially since this age of the white crown and the red crown on Earth in various forms. But the Sphinx comes from a much earlier age. And what is the Sphinx?
They don't want you to know that.
They don't want you to know this. And there's a reason I think they don't want you to know this, because the Sphinx is the lion, the constellation of Leo. And in astrology, what is the sign of the king? Leo. Leo is the true king. I would argue the Odyssean king. You know, if you know the story of Odysseus coming back to rid his kingdom of the suitors who've taken over and are destroying everything. And there is this one true king, Odysseus, who comes back. Now, to my mind, Leo is the kingship, and the Sphinx is part of, I've got goosebumps as I'm sharing this, the Sphinx is part of what is heralding the true kingship from ancient times. Now, I'm a big fan of the work of Surya Yukteswar. Joseph Selby speaks a lot about Surya Yukteswar's analysis of the yugas and how the timeline of precession ties into cycles of man. The Bible talks about, in the book of Daniel, these different ages of man. Many ancient scriptures talk about this. And we are currently in this lower age of man, so Dwapara Yuga, Kali Yuga. It's a bit uncertain exactly where we fall right at this point in time, but this Egyptian culture that occurred when the uniting of the white crown and the red crown happened came at a time when mankind was dropping down into the lowest age of mankind, the lowest level of consciousness.
I'm going to put it right here.
Oh, good.
A chart from Joseph Selby, and I'll say, before we go too far from Leo and Capricorn, could you just say, where is Leo in relationship to Capricorn?
Opposite.
On the exact opposing side of the wheel. Mm-hmm. And also
it's opposite Aquarius, so...
These cycles, the Yuga cycles that you're talking about, also ties in potentially to the shape of the solar system and the celestial mechanics. What are we in a binary system? And Walter Cruttenden, his genius was to say this argument of Sri Yukteswar, who was writing in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and was explaining ancient Indian traditions of the yugas, the ages. And apparently he got a lot of his insight from his meditation and his own just intuition and enlightenment. But he articulated the yuga cycle and said, here's how I see it matching up with history. Walter Cruttenden's genius was to say, there are clearly some problems with the idea that the sun is just all by itself. Just about every star we see in the sky, we now know to be either a binary or a multiple, more than two, in a pair. Is it possible that we are in a binary? Precession is not caused by our wobble, and Walter points out, it can't be caused by our wobble because the planets don't precess. So within the solar system, we don't see precession. So precession must be something that's going on other than just Earth wobbling by itself. No, because that would make the whole sky, everything in the sky wobble too. And so he said, could it be that we're in a binary, and when we're closer, we're getting the benevolent energy of two stars, and when we're farther, we're getting less of that other star, and he matched it up too. So this also ties in with celestial mechanics. Sorry to interject, but I thought...
It helps. It all helps, because this lower stage we've been in since the last 2,000 to 4,000 years, let's say, lower stage of mankind has been theoretically when we're furthest from our binary companion, and therefore the consciousness of man is low. And it's my belief that we've been in this false governance, false kings, false era that's hierarchical and very...
it's really oligarchical. I would argue it's more oligarchy.
That's right. Capricorn rules oligarchs in astrology.
And plutocracy,
exactly.
like the rule by the wealthy oligarchs. And let me just, at the risk of derailing you, let me just jump in, because...
I can always pick it up again.
In the ancient times... I was asked, well, what do you think of kings? What do you think of monarchy? And I said, the ancient myths don't seem to have a problem with monarchy, and they also don't seem to have a problem with democracy. The Odysseus reference that you brought up, Odysseus is away from his home. He's the king of Ithaca, the rightful king, but he's away. And meantime, these suitors are lounging around, devouring the food and the riches and everything else and doing nothing. They're just lounging around, and the gods say that behavior is despicable. So we know that behavior is despicable. When Odysseus comes back, he was the king before, but the suitors say, hey, wait a minute, you've been gone 20 years. We all have a right to say that someone else might be a better king. You've been taking a vacation for 20 years. I think I deserve to be the king. No, I think I do. And they all get together and they basically vote and they choose Odysseus. But the point is, it's almost like a democracy. Who are we going to elect the king? And so the ancient myths have a problem with oligarchy. They have a problem with the devouring of the wealth, the gifts of the gods by these just basically
self-styled
parasites who are just taking. The oligarchy is the problem, not the monarchy, not a rightful king. A rightful king is supposed to prevent oligarchs. Professor Michael Hudson explains the prevention of oligarchs is the key. He goes back into ancient economics, Professor Michael Hudson. So the ancient system was built on prevention of oligarchy. And when you describe this kind of hierarchical structure, that's like elitism is oligarchy. King being on the opposite side of the zodiac is the antagonist to that.
It's true leadership.
The true king is supposed to prevent oligarchy. Now, what I would argue you have with the, quote, kings of today, they're basically just allowing the oligarchs because they come from those same. They're not acting. The king is supposed to stop the oligarchs from devouring the people. That's the role of a proper king.
That's right.
And so, anyway, I just wanted to throw that kind of,
yes,
bring it up
right.
to
The current oligarchs are in cahoots with the leadership. And so it's all about their power and their control at the expense of nations, at the expense of people. But a true king doesn't do that.
But we're moving out of the age of oligarchs. And so the oligarchy, or we could call them, we could call it lots of different names. Let's just say oligarchy for now.
But they're associated with Capricorn, and that's why I'm referring to this.
And they're not happy about it, that the gears of heaven...
I'll get to that.
Go ahead.
Thanks. But so my discussion here is what's going on in the world right now, and as we know, Pluto is moving out of Capricorn. Now, think about the baby boom generation. They were all born with Pluto in Leo, the sign of true kingship. And were the powers that be who had control and their fingers in the pie at that time in the world happy about the leadership that was coming up from during Pluto in Leo, the transit of Pluto in Leo? These were people like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, JFK, RFK. In Australia, we had Harold Holt and Gough Whitlam, all representing that era when Pluto was in Leo, trying to make change, trying to bring about prosperity and blessing to the nations and to the people.
And threatening the establishment. They talked about the establishment, and the establishment put those leaders down hard or killed them.
They did, all in the era of Pluto in Leo. And that's very interesting for me to see that. But, we're watching at this point in time the play of power. And I think it's my belief, you can disagree with me if you would like to, but it is my belief that we are at the end of an age, or it might take 100 so years before we fully move out of this age of control by the Capricornian and the oligarchy, as we move into back up in the Yuga cycle towards the golden age when we have the true kingship coming into being. Now, that being the case, there is a role that Pluto has been playing for the last 14 years as he's transited Capricorn to expose all of these things. And I'm just checking my notes here. I've got written here about the Sphinx. We've already talked about that as an illustration of perhaps a structure that came from the Golden Age. We have the head of the Sphinx that it is believed may have been carved or altered later to put a man's head, an Egyptian man's head, on the body of a lion. But there's some evidence to suggest that perhaps it actually had a lion's head previously.
And if you look at the works of Robert Bauval, and he also co-wrote a book with Graham Hancock about the mystery of the Sphinx or the age of the Sphinx, and talking about if it was originally a lion, it is looking due east. So due east is where this, the sun rises on the equinox. And it's got a background set of stars on the equinox that changes over the ages. That's what the precession of the equinoxes is. But if you go back to when the sun on the equinox, the spring equinox we're talking about, the March equinox, was rising in Leo, well, that's 10,000 BC. Or that time frame. It's that time frame that the Sphinx could not have possibly been made in, because no, there was nothing then. That's impossible. Our paradigm doesn't allow for it. But if you read Robert Bauval and Graham Hancock's books about that very subject, they make that argument.
That's right. The golden age, this highest age of mankind, kind of covers quite a number of the precessional ages. Leo, Virgo, Libra are the main ones, but they're, either side of that, they're actually also very influential as well. The golden age is the longest age in the Yuga cycle, and I encourage you to check out the work of Joseph Selby on the Yuga cycle.
I'll put the diagram.
Yeah, thank you. That'd be great. So Pluto in Capricorn recently has awakened people to the truth. Pluto is a truth revealer, and now Pluto's moving tropically into the sign of Aquarius. He will be here until 2044. 20 years he's going to be here. He will also be visibly in the sky in sidereal Capricorn at this time as well. So there's going to be, I feel, a battle between the people, the masses, which are represented in astrology by Aquarius, and the oligarchy, Capricorn. And so we may be looking at, I hate to say it, but 20 years of awakening as the masses further to what the oligarchy has done and continues to do, and also waking up to our own power.
Why do you hate to say it? Because it takes so long?
Well, I don't want 20 years of difficulty. I just want peace. I'm a Libra moon. I just want everybody to live in peace. But we're also waking up as a sign of the masses in astrology, Aquarius. We're waking up to our own power. The last time Pluto was in Aquarius, we didn't know about Pluto, the planet's existence. We knew about the god Pluto, but not about the planet. And that governance had not been given to the planet. I refer to him as a planet, even though the powers that be have demoted Pluto. I think they're perhaps concerned about Pluto being so powerful as a planet, so we'll demote him to a dwarf planet instead, and that's why he's no longer included in the
9 planets that you all grew up with, or at least
that's right.
We grew up with 9 planets.
In astrology, we still use Pluto and we still refer to him as a planet. There may be a conspiracy theory around the demotion of Pluto. I'd probably subscribe to that myself. But now I've forgotten what I was saying.
I think you came up with that conspiracy theory,
probably.
Actually. That's your
I think it is
your
mine,
insight.
Actually.
Yeah. That, they decided, they saw it coming and they said, okay, what are we going to do about this? I know, let's just declare Pluto not to be a planet anymore.
But the truth is, now we are consciously aware of Pluto and Pluto's energy is the point I'm trying to make. Last time Pluto was in the sign of Aquarius, we weren't. But what happened during the last time Pluto was in the sign of Aquarius was French Revolution, American Revolution. There were uprisings of the people everywhere. And now we're in an age where we're moving into Pluto in Aquarius again, but with the consciousness, the awareness of Pluto and Pluto's energy. So I feel the next 20 years is going to be very powerful for the awakening of people, and realizing further to our realization of the last 14 years of Pluto and Capricorn about oligarchical, hierarchical structures who don't have our best interests and the best interest of nations at heart. Now we're going to see the people perhaps rising up, taking back their power. We may see revolution again over the next 20 years, but it's necessary. It's a necessary process for us to head back to this golden age where we are vibrating at a high level. We've got the 2 binary companion stars in closer proximity to one another, and therefore the level of mankind's consciousness is better. We're vibrating at a higher level. We're interacting with love and kindness and creativity towards one another, and benevolence. There's equality. There's no disease and poverty and greed and corruption is all gone. And I know it's going to take a few thousand years of incarnation to get to that point, but this, where we're at right now, is a necessary process to heading back to that stage. So I just wanted to build on that topic from what David shared in his wonderful presentation about Egypt. We're hoping to be in Egypt in November, where a lot of these ideas we will continue to unpack. I'll be looking at people's personal astrology charts to see what's unfolding in people's personal lives. At the time I'll be
pointing out stars in the night sky over Egypt.
I'll be doing astrology like readings for people, obviously, and talking about the Egyptian influence on our current use of astrology. And as Dave said, he will be guiding us through stargazing in Egypt and how a lot of the star systems line up with the monuments and what have you. Also talking about similar theories to what we've been exposed to today, with this amazing information about the red crown and the white crown.
And just looking at the artwork and how I've shown artwork from Egypt and how it relates to the stars before, but now, and I would refer people to my 2019 book, Ancient Worldwide System, where I have chapters on Egypt, unpacking the connections between Egyptian myth and the stars. And what I was going to say is, when we go there, we'll be seeing art in person, and I know we'll be seeing artwork, some of which I've never seen before, and I will be very excited to see that. But we need those expressions of interest. You can go through the links to tell Patricia that you would like to go, and if we have the proper number, then we'll move forward from there. But I really look forward to that. And the other thing is, Patricia has been living in Egypt and leading tours, taking groups to these amazing sites. Egypt is like a repository of this ancient knowledge, and I'm so excited to go and do that. So thank you so much, Kesenya, for coming on and sharing that today.
Thank you for having me. Much appreciated.
And I think the gears of heaven, the motion, these cycles that you've been sharing, and these insights that you've been sharing, and bringing up Odysseus, the gods in the Odyssey describe what the suitors are doing as despicable. And that is good news, because it means that they're going against the flow of the universe. Eventually, the suitors do get their comeuppance in the Odyssey. The flow of the universe is against what these enslavers are doing. People who are enslaving humanity, oppressing, exploiting, they're going against the gears of heaven, and it just will not last forever. So
that's right.
That's a very hopeful note to end on. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.